The story of Esther takes us to a time of great opulence and intrigue during the reign of Xerxes, the powerful king of Persia. The setting is the city of Susa, where the Persian Empire stretches out in all its grandeur. We are in a period of exile, where many Jews find themselves far from their homeland, living under the laws of a foreign king. But in the midst of this scenario, a story of courage and providence emerges that would change the destiny of a nation. Esther, a young Jewish woman of humble origin, raised by her cousin Mordecai, finds herself in a unique and challenging position. From complete anonymity, she is elevated to the role of queen of the greatest empire of that time. The book of Esther presents us with a narrative where faith, risk, and unconditional surrender to God's will come together in a surprising way. It is a story of difficult choices and bravery, where each decision could mean life or death. Yet, it is also a story of hope, showing that even in the most adverse circumstances, the hand of God is not absent. As we follow this journey, we will see how the actions of a woman who chose to put her people above herself became a symbol of faith and determination, and how a decree of destruction was transformed into a celebration of victory that has endured through the centuries. Prepare yourself to dive into this narrative that blends drama, grandeur, and timeless lessons. We will explore every detail of Esther's life, her courage before the throne, the hidden dangers in the Persian courts, and how her faith guided the destiny of an entire nation. The story begins in the third year of Xerxes' reign, also known as Ahasuerus, one of the most powerful kings of Persia. To showcase all his wealth and power, Xerxes organizes a grand banquet that lasts 180 days, followed by 7 more days of celebrations at the palace in Susa, open to both nobles and common people of the city. The descriptions of the festivities are impressive. The palace is adorned with tapestries of white, green, and sky blue linen, hanging from fine linen and purple cords, supported by silver rings on marble columns. The couches were of gold and silver, gleaming on a pavement of porphyry, marble, alabaster, and precious stones. Every detail reflects the wealth and opulence of the Persian Empire, presenting a scene of grandeur that symbolizes Xerxes' authority. While the king celebrates with his guests, Queen Vashti also hosts a banquet for the women in the palace. On the last day of the festivities, joyful with wine, Xerxes decides to display Vashti's beauty before all his guests. He sends his eunuchs to summon the queen, ordering her to appear wearing her royal crown. But Vashti refuses the king's command. The exact reason for her refusal is not explained in the text, but it is an act that directly challenges Xerxes' authority and defies the expectations of the court. This moment of tension opens the door to a series of events that would alter the course of history. Vashti's refusal is seen as an act of insubordination, not only against the king, but against the entire social order of that time. Xerxes, furious and embarrassed before his guests, consults his advisors to decide what to do with Vashti. They argue that the queen's behavior could inspire other women to disobey their husbands and suggest that she be removed from the throne. Thus, to preserve his authority and set an example, Xerxes issues an irrevocable decree. Vashti is banished from her position as queen. Vashti's dismissal marks the beginning of a significant shift in the kingdom. The Persian court, which was once in celebration, now finds itself in search of a new queen. What seemed like a simple banquet turns into an event that triggers a series of occurrences that will affect not only the throne, but the future of the entire Jewish people. This turning point creates the opening for a new figure to emerge in Xerxes' palace, a young woman who will become the instrument of salvation for her people. And so, the stage is set for Esther's entrance into the story. After the removal of Vashti, King Xerxes feels the need for a new queen. His advisors suggest searching for the most beautiful young women from across the empire, so that one among them may be chosen to replace Vashti. Thus, a great selection process begins throughout the kingdom, and young women from various regions are brought to the palace in Susa. It is in this context that we meet Esther, a young Jewish woman of humble origin. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, but she adopts the Persian name Esther, which means star. Orphaned by both father and mother, Esther was raised by her cousin Mordecai, who became a father figure to her. Mordecai was a just man, God-fearing, and was among the exiled Jews living in Susa. Esther is a young woman of great beauty, but what sets her apart is her humble attitude and her willingness to learn. When she arrives at the palace, she quickly wins the favor of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of preparing the young women to be presented to the king. Esther receives special treatment, including beauty treatments and the best accommodations, which already points to a special destiny. Despite being in a luxurious environment, Esther follows an important piece of advice from Mordecai. She does not reveal her identity as a Jew. This guidance proves to be crucial for future events, keeping Esther protected from the tensions that could arise between her people and the Persians. After a long period of preparation, the day finally arrives for Esther to be presented before King Xerxes. Her presence is striking, and the king is captivated by her beauty and distinctive demeanor. Among all the young women, it is Esther who captures the heart of Xerxes, who decides to crown her as Queen of Persia. Thus, the young Jewish woman, who had lived in anonymity, becomes the new queen of the greatest empire of that time. But this position of honor also brings great responsibilities and challenges that she does not yet fully understand. Little did Esther know that her role would go far beyond banquets and the luxury of the court. The fate of her people, the Jews, would depend on her courage and faith in the darkest moments yet to come. The story of Esther teaches us that many times, God places people in strategic positions, preparing them for crucial moments. And Esther's choice as queen is just the beginning of a journey that will reveal the power of divine providence amidst the intrigues and threats of the Persian court. Now that Esther is queen, the story continues to unfold with new dangers and challenges. In the next chapter, we will see the rise of Haman and the plot that will put Esther's life and the life of her entire people at risk. With Esther now established as queen, the narrative of the book of Esther introduces a new central character, Haman the Agagite. He is promoted by Xerxes to a position of great authority in the Persian Empire. His influence grows rapidly, and all of the king's officials are instructed to bow before him as a sign of respect. But Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refuses to bow or pay homage to Haman. The reason is not explicitly mentioned in the text, but some scholars suggest that it may have been for religious reasons, as Mordecai was a God-fearing Jew who did not recognize the authority of any man above that of his Lord. Both Jews and Christians bow only to worship God. Mordecai's refusal does not go unnoticed and soon reaches Haman's ears. Haman is deeply enraged by Mordecai's attitude, but he seeks more than personal revenge. He decides on something even darker, to destroy not only Mordecai, but all the Jews in Xerxes' kingdom. This decision reveals his deep hatred and the extent of his evil, turning a personal dispute into a genocidal plan against an entire people. Cunning and manipulative, Haman approaches the king and, without mentioning that the people he wants to destroy are the Jews, describes them as a group that lives scattered and isolated throughout the empire, with laws different from those of all other peoples and who do not follow the king's laws. He argues that it would be better for the kingdom if these rebels were eliminated. Convinced by Haman and not fully understanding the consequences of his decision, Xerxes authorizes the plan. He hands Haman his ring, giving him the power to seal any decree in the king's name. Haman then writes a decree, sealed with Xerxes' ring, ordering the extermination of all Jews in the empire on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. The news of this decree spreads quickly throughout the empire, bringing consternation and despair to the Jewish people. In Susa, Mordecai dons mourning clothes, covered in ashes, and cries out loudly for God's mercy in the streets of the city. Throughout the empire, Jews weep and fast, aware that their survival is threatened by an implacable enemy. Esther, however, is still unaware of the full extent of the plot. Protected within the palace, she does not immediately feel the impact of the decree, but that is about to change as Mordecai seeks a way to communicate with her, hoping that the queen might be the key to reversing the situation. Tension rises, and the threat to the lives of all the Jewish people looms like a shadow over the Persian kingdom. Haman's plan seems irreversible, But divine providence has other plans. The extermination decree signed by Haman spreads like wildfire throughout the empire, bringing despair to the Jewish people. In every province, the Jews are in deep mourning, wearing sackcloth and covering themselves with ashes, weeping and fasting, aware that they face a death sentence. Among them is Mordecai, who remains at the palace gates, dressed in mourning, unable to enter the royal courts due to the rules prohibiting mourning garments within the gates. When Esther hears that Mordecai is wearing mourning clothes, she sends garments for him to wear, but Mordecai refuses. The queen then sends Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, to inquire about the situation. Mordecai reveals to Hathach the severity of the decree and asks Esther to intercede with the king on behalf of her people. He even gives her a copy of the decree so that Esther can fully understand the gravity of the situation. But Esther is aware of the dangers involved. She explains to Mordecai that according to Persian law, no one can approach the king without being summoned under penalty of death, unless the king extends his golden scepter. And it has been 30 days since she was last called into the king's presence. The queen finds herself facing a terrible dilemma: intervene and risk her life, or remain silent, protected in her position, but allowing her people to suffer. Mordecai's response to this dilemma is one of the most emblematic and challenging moments in the entire story. He sends the following message to Esther: "Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's house any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Esther 4:13-14. These words echo not only as an appeal, but as a call to responsibility and courage. Mordecai reminds Esther that her position as queen is not merely a privilege, but an opportunity given by God to make a difference at a crucial moment. Mordecai's faith shines in this moment, acknowledging that deliverance will come, no matter the path, but also that Esther has an essential role in this story. Faced with these words, Esther makes the decision that will change the course of events. She sends word to Mordecai: "Go, gather all the Jews who are present in Susa and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Esther 4:16. This response marks a turning point in the story. Esther sets aside her fear and decides to risk her life for her people. The 3 days of fasting that follow are not just an act of preparation, but a profound expression of dependence on God and a plea for His intervention. The palace of Susa, which once seemed like a place of safety for Esther, now becomes a stage of uncertainty and danger. Esther's determination and Mordecai's faith inspire the Jews to pray and fast, joining in a wave of hope amidst despair. The young queen prepares for the most dangerous moment of her life, trusting that somehow God will use her position to change the fate of her people. After 3 days of fasting, Esther prepares for the most risky moment of her life. She dons her royal garments, symbolizing not only her position as queen, but also the courage she has embraced in light of her calling. Every step toward the throne room is filled with tension, for she knows that if the king does not extend his scepter, she could be executed for appearing without being summoned. As she enters King Xerxes' presence, the room falls silent. All eyes turn to Esther, waiting for the monarch's reaction. Xerxes watches her, and in a moment that seems to last an eternity, he finally extends the golden scepter toward her. Esther is received, and the risk she has taken now turns into an opportunity to save her people. With the scepter extended, Esther approaches and touches its tip, as a gesture of respect to the king's authority. Xerxes, noticing that she risked so much to be there, shows curiosity and kindness, asking her, "What is your request, Queen Esther, and what is your petition? Up to half of the kingdom, it will be granted to you." Instead of immediately revealing the true reason for her visit, Esther chooses a cautious path. She invites Xerxes and Haman to a special banquet she is preparing. Esther's choice to delay her request may seem intriguing, but it reveals her wisdom. She knows that such a delicate moment requires preparation and the creation of a favorable atmosphere. At the first banquet, the tension still lingers in the air. Once again, Esther does not make her final request, but invites the king and Haman to a second banquet the following day. Haman, unaware of the danger that lies ahead, leaves the palace elated, proud to have been invited to a personal banquet with the queen and the king. But Haman's pride quickly turns to hatred when he sees Mordecai once again refusing to bow before him. Consumed with rage, Haman decides to take an extreme measure. He orders the construction of a gallows 22 meters high, planning to ask the king to have Mordecai hanged the next day. Haman's plan seems to move forward without any obstacles, and he feels more secure in his position than ever. Meanwhile, Esther waits for the right moment to reveal her true request, preparing herself to face not only the king, but also Haman, who now poses a direct threat to her people and her own cousin. The tension reaches its peak, and the unfolding of events depends on each calculated move made by Esther. That night, when everything seemed to be heading toward a tragic outcome, something unexpected happens. King Xerxes cannot sleep, in what seems like a simple moment, but reveals the hand of divine providence. He orders the Book of Chronicles to be brought to him, where the events of the kingdom are recorded. As the records are read to him, a specific account catches his attention, a forgotten incident that now becomes crucial in changing the course of history. The account describes how, sometime before, Mordecai had uncovered a plot by two eunuchs who were planning to assassinate the king. Xerxes realizes that despite Mordecai having saved his life, he was never rewarded for this act of loyalty. Determined to correct this oversight, the king decides to honor Mordecai. The next morning, as Haman enters the palace with the intention of requesting Mordecai's execution, he is surprised by a question from the king. What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman, in his arrogance, believes the king must be referring to him, and he suggests a grand honor, that this man be dressed in the king's royal robes, ride the king's horse, and be led through the streets of the city while it is proclaimed, "This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor." To Haman's surprise and horror, Xerxes orders him to do exactly this for Mordecai, the man he so deeply hates. With no way to refuse the king's command, Haman is forced to dress Mordecai in royal robes and lead him through the streets of Susa, loudly proclaiming his honor. Every step Haman takes beside Mordecai is a blow to his pride and to his plans. This reversal is an epic and ironic moment in the story. The man who had planned to destroy Mordecai is now compelled to exalt him before the entire city. The contrast between Haman's pride and the justice that finally manifests is clear, and Mordecai's role as a man honored by the king highlights the dramatic turn of fate. After this public humiliation, Haman returns home, crushed and ashamed, and recounts what happened to his wife and friends. They realize that this change in fortune is a sign that Haman may be in great danger, as he has set himself against someone now favored by the king. Before Haman can recover from his defeat, the king's eunuchs arrive to take him to the second banquet that Esther has prepared. Little does he know, this meeting will mark the final turning point in his fate. At the second banquet prepared by Esther, the atmosphere is filled with tension. Haman arrives at the palace, unaware that this would be his last day of glory. King Xerxes and Haman sit at Esther's table, enjoying the banquet she had prepared. The king, curious about why Esther risked so much to appear without being summoned, once again asks, "What is your request, Queen Esther? And what is your petition? Up to half the kingdom it will be granted to you." This time, Esther knows that the moment has come to reveal her true request, and she does so with courage. She responds, "If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king, grant me my life. This is my request, and spare the life of my people. This is my desire. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I would have kept quiet. But the destruction of my people is a threat to the life of the kingdom." The impact of Esther's words is immediate. The king, perplexed and furious, asks, "Who is he, and where is the man who dared to do such a thing?" The queen then points to Haman, saying, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Haman's expression of shock is clear. The man who had planned to destroy the Jews, unaware that Esther was also Jewish, now finds himself exposed as the enemy. The king, filled with rage, rises and goes out to the palace garden, trying to contain his anger and reflect on what he has just heard. Haman, realizing that his fate is sealed, desperately tries to beg for his life. He throws himself at Esther's feet, pleading for mercy. At that moment, the king returns from the garden, and seeing Haman fallen beside the queen, interprets the scene as an attempt to assault Esther. Filled with a mixture of indignation and fury, Xerxes orders that Haman be taken away and immediately punished. One of the palace eunuchs, Harbona, mentions to the king that Haman had built a gallows 22 meters high for Mordecai, the man who had saved the king's life. In an act of immediate justice, Xerxes orders that Haman be hanged on the same gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The final scene is laden with irony and retribution. Haman, who sought to exterminate Mordecai and his people, now suffers the consequences of his own plans. The enemy of the Jews is executed, and his downfall marks a definitive change in the fate of Esther, Mordecai, and all the Jewish people. Justice is served, but there remains a challenge. The extermination decree against the Jews, which was sealed with the king's ring, is still in effect. In the Persian Empire, a law once decreed cannot be revoked. Esther will once again have to intercede with the king to find a solution that ensures the survival of her people. With Haman's downfall, the lives of the Jews in the Persian Empire take a turn, but the danger has not yet completely passed. Although Haman is dead, the decree he issued, ordering the extermination of all Jews on the 13th day of the month of Adar, remains in effect. According to Persian law, a decree sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked, not even by Xerxes himself. Thus, Esther once again stands before the king, this time with a new plea. She falls at Xerxes' feet and, with tears in her eyes, begs for the life of her people. The king, moved by Esther's passion and Mordecai's loyalty, extends the golden scepter once again, allowing her to speak. Esther requests that Haman's decree be revoked, but the decree could not be undone, not even by the king. Recognizing the injustice of the situation, King Xerxes grants Mordecai and Esther the freedom to write a new decree in the king's name and seal it with the royal ring that once belonged to Haman. Mordecai quickly drafts the decree, allowing the Jews in every province of the empire to gather and defend themselves against any force that attempts to attack them on the appointed day of their destruction. The new decree is swiftly sent out by couriers on horseback, crossing all the provinces of the vast Persian Empire, from India to Ethiopia. As the news spreads, the mourning and despair among the Jews give way to new hope. Throughout the empire, the Jews prepare to defend themselves, and in several cities they gain the support of other groups who now fear Mordecai's growing influence in the court. In Susa, the capital, the joy is even greater, as Mordecai, now one of the most influential men in the empire, wears royal robes of blue and white with a large crown of gold. The honor and glory Mordecai receives are seen as a clear sign that the fate of the Jews has changed. Mourning turns into celebration, and the fear that once hovered over the Jewish people is replaced by the hope of victory. But the day marked for the battle still approaches, and the Jews know that their enemies will not easily give up on attacking them. The new decree does not cancel the violence Haman had planned, but it gives the Jewish people the chance to fight for their survival. The tension now moves to the battlefield, where the courage and unity of the Jews will be put to the test. They will face their enemies with the confidence that the God of their ancestors is by their side, turning a day of death into a day of resistance and triumph. The long-feared day finally arrives, the 13th day of the month of Adar. This was the day decreed by Haman for the extermination of the Jews throughout the Persian Empire. However, thanks to the new decree written by Mordecai and Esther, the Jews are now allowed to organize and defend themselves against their enemies. The sun rises over a tense Susa as the Jews gather in their communities, ready to fight for their lives. The atmosphere is filled with anticipation and determination. The enemies of the Jews, who expected an easy attack, are surprised by the unity and courage they encounter. The battle spreads across the provinces of the empire, but the Jews, strengthened by faith and divine protection, prevail on all fronts. In Susa, the capital of the empire, the Jews face an especially intense battle. Over the course of 2 days, they managed to defeat their adversaries, including Haman's 10 sons, who sought to avenge their father's downfall. In total, 800 enemies fall in Susa. In other provinces of the empire, around 75,000 of those who hated the Jews are defeated. Despite the magnitude of the victory, the Jews do not seize the spoils, showing that their objective was not material gain, but the defense of their lives. To commemorate this victory, the Jews institute the Feast of Purim, a celebration of joy and gratitude. The name Purim comes from the word pur, which means lot, referring to the lots Haman cast to choose the day of the Jews' destruction. But what was meant to be a day of disaster turned into a day of deliverance and triumph. The Feast of Purim is established by Mordecai and Esther as a perpetual memorial, so that all future generations would remember how God reversed the fate of his people, turning mourning into celebration and despair into joy. It is a day of feasting, gifts, and aid to the needy, symbolizing the unity and gratitude among the Jews. The story of Esther and the Feast of Purim is not just about military victory, but about the preservation of a people's identity and the trust in a providence that works in mysterious ways. To this day, Purim is celebrated by Jews as a reminder that, even in the most difficult situations, God can reverse fortune and bring deliverance. With the defeat of the enemies of the Jews and the institution of Purim, the story of Esther and Mordecai comes to its conclusion. After Haman's downfall, Mordecai assumes a position of great importance in the Persian Empire, becoming second in authority, right below King Xerxes. With the ring that once belonged to Haman, Mordecai now has the power and influence to make decisions that benefit the Jewish people and ensure their safety throughout the empire. He is respected and loved by the Jews, as he used his position to seek the welfare of his people and promote peace. Mordecai's glory is more than a personal rise. It represents the triumph of justice and faith in the face of persecution and evil. His story, like Esther's, is a testimony of how God can use ordinary people, place them in strategic positions, and through them bring salvation and hope. The book of Esther in its final chapter also emphasizes the greatness of Xerxes' reign and Mordecai's accomplishments. But above all, what resonates is the divine providence that guided every step of this narrative. From the removal of Vashti to the crowning of Esther, from the king's insomnia to Haman's downfall, every detail seems to be part of a greater plan that ensured the survival of God's people in the midst of a hostile empire. The book of Esther ends without directly mentioning the name of God, but his action is evident in every twist of the story. It reminds us that even when everything seems lost and God's silence seems to prevail, he is present, moving the pieces on the chessboard of history to fulfill his purposes. The story of Esther invites us to reflect on the role of courage and faith in our own lives. Esther, a young woman who could have settled comfortably into her position as queen, chose to risk everything for her people. Mordecai, a man who could have remained silent in the face of Haman's threats, stood firm in his trust that deliverance would come, even though he did not know from where. The narrative teaches us that behind the events of everyday life and the decisions we make, there is a sovereign hand guiding destinies. Esther's example challenges us to recognize the opportunities we have to make a difference in our own time, trusting that even in the darkest moments, there is a purpose for our lives. And you, what can you learn from the story of Esther? In what moments of your life have you needed courage and trust that something greater was at stake? If this story has inspired you, share this video with someone who needs a message of hope and strength to face their challenges. Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories of faith, courage, and wisdom. Join us on the next journey through the universe of the Bible, where each story brings lessons that continue to echo in our lives to this day.